So it's been a torrid week in British politics. If you've been watching TV or been reading the newspapers, you'll have seen wall-to-wall coverage of apparently the worst scandals since Watergate or Iran-Contra. Boris Johnson may have met his mother at Chequers during the lockdown. And Suella Braverman, our fascist Home Secretary, Cruella, has been given a speeding ticket. Charlie, what do you make of these monsters?
Yeah. Well, it's
lay into them. Go on, let's give people what they want.
Yeah, this is the resistance in the spiked office there. Look, I mean, it's high vis politics, right? It's yellow jacketed. You can't do that. You can't say that kind of politics. Where we have. Well, there was a Tory MP, right, who said in Parliament today, scandals used to be about sex and ministers invading Iraq on the basis of lies and killing hundreds of thousands of people.
And prostitutes.
Yeah. Exactly. Where's all that madness? And instead it's just, Suella Braverman sought private advice about how she might deal with a speeding fine. Could she seek, she asked a civil servant, am I allowed to speak? Can I do this in private or do I have to do it as a class? I would say quite a legitimate request to make, considering you're the Home Secretary. You might want to have specific security placement in concern, all that kind of stuff. This is being treated as, the most scandalous move by a minister in decades. I think part of the reason why so many journalists are keen to run this line and why the media kind of goes wild with it is because they're still running on the high of the end of the Boris Johnson era, the scalp hunting era, when they realised, journalists were in charge for that 2-week madness when everyone was dropping out and, ministers were signing on for 5 minutes and then taking the pay cut right after. The same kind of thing is still happening now. And because when Rishi Sunak came into power last year, he said in his big speech outside Downing Street, when he took office, saying, my premiership will be governed by values and standards. Yeah. And so whenever there's the slightest hint of, they call it sleaze in all these stories. It's not sleaze, it's just small discussions. Whenever that happens, journalists will say, despite Rishi Sunak promising to discuss the high levels of professionalism in his service, and then it allows them to use that as a sort of news hook for the most minute, pointless stories. Inflation running at 10%, migration over 600,000, but instead the front pages are Suella Braverman spoke to an official.
There was even a point this week where someone tried to make a scandal out of the fact that Suella Braverman was involved in a charity in Rwanda, and that might have coloured her view of the country. In relation to the Rwanda scheme, even though she didn't set up the scheme.
Yeah, no, it was ridiculous. And you could see actually as the week was bearing on that the civil servants who were obviously leaking these stories to the media were just almost turning up the temperature. They felt like resignation or an ousting was in the offing. There was one, the stories got quite bitchy. There was one about how we have to fact check her in cabinet meetings. It's like this sort of thing where you just sort of think the dynamic is so clear now, which is the fact that there are people in the civil service who obviously don't like a vast array of Tory ministers for quite obvious reasons. And they know that, particularly because the government is pretty weak, it's pretty incapable of standing up for itself, its electoral mandate such as it is sort of withering away. And so they can leak, turn up the pressure quite easily. It was interesting that Sunak actually stuck by Braverman in this case, but I think he almost had no option given the fact that he's been accused of being too weak by his own backbenchers for so long. But it's just so transparent now that unholy alliance between kind of miffed civil servants who are upset that Labour's not in power or something, and members of the media who basically with the same view, can just kind of oust ministers at will. And this is a really bad dynamic. And it's fascinating that it's had off the back of increasingly minor issues. Like people talk about the ministerial code like it's Magna Carta or something. This was written in 1997, and there's a good piece on Conservative Home about this. It's so broad as to be basically unenforceable. It essentially makes leaking to the press something that ministers shouldn't do. No minister who served in the modern era would meet that standard. Yeah. But again, people talk about it as she has breached the ministerial code. This is dreadful. It's incredible. Pearl clutching.
But it points to Tory failure that it still exists. They are to blame in some way for the scalp hunting that they're enduring because they've allowed this pointless ministerial code to run unchecked for so long. You said it was only introduced in 97. They're running under Blairite rules and then being surprised when Blairite civil servants and media professionals are coming after them under the rules they created. And it was last updated in 2010, just before the Tories turned up. If they wanted to win the war, they should change the battles that they're fighting instead of just repeating the same fights that their enemies are setting the rules that they are falling into. Change them.
Well, I mean, I'd like to see the howls of outrage when they do try to change it or something like
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
there you go. We should talk briefly about Boris before we move on. Partygate. I think Partygate is in a slightly different order of magnitude in the sense that it was actually a serious scandal that Boris broke the rules that he imposed on the rest of us. But did we have to hear about it day in, day out? Did it have to be more forensically examined than the vast majority of crime scenes? You know, we know what we think about Boris breaking lockdown parties by now, but it's still getting milked somehow.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is righteous anger still over it. I'm sure there are people who, 3 years ago were told they couldn't do X, Y, Z, and they still feel a sense of burning injustice and fury about what he was getting up to and all the rest of it with parties and cake. And actually, I feel a bit ill talking about cake again. It was the most appalling period of my life when the whole news for a month was what counts as a party.
Union Jack cake.
But that's one of the most unforgivable things about Partygate. If you're going to break the rules, make them good.
It was-
right?
it was-
Make these parties good. We all saw those photos.
Chilled packaged sandwiches.
Exactly. And like a tiny can of Australia in the afternoon.
I can't look at Australia the same anymore.
Never the same. If you're going to break the rules, make it good. Like, it's like if you're going to have a scandal, it should involve some actually scandalous.
So
But they talk about it like it was some kind of Saturnalian orgy. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Sure. And in some way, a little bit of me does feel a sense of understanding when people do get so enraged because of what they were put through at the same time. But it has been so many years now, and he's also no longer in power. They're holding him to account because he handed over his diary, right? When he claimed, I had some people around at Chequers. Now who cares? Now who cares? Because this man doesn't have the power anymore that you're trying to resist. There is no question of, is this person with terrible integrity governing us still? No, he's the bumbling ex-PM who's making money doing speeches. It frankly doesn't matter.